We are launching a series this week in which we are running down Ohio State opponents week by week, starting with week 1. And so I know everybody's gearing up for the Arkansas State preview next week. But please bear with us. We want to give every opponent his time. So while you're gearing up for Arkansas State and that huge conversation next week, and Toledo the following week, we will suffer through the Notre Dame breakdown here with
Toledo almost beat Notre Dame last year, Mark. So I understand.
Right. Absolutely. But this guy is one of the very best in the business. We got Brian Driscoll here from Irish Breakdown. And Brian, we appreciate your time. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Well, this one, so if we just take two of the best programs and teams in the country, put them together, everybody's geeked up and ready to see that game. But is there more to it than that? Is there more to it because of the proximity of the schools, more to it because of Marcus Freeman now being the head coach? Brian, is there more to it because these are two of the very pillars of the sport? All those things make it even better, bigger, more hyped than it would be otherwise.
Oh, absolutely. I think the Marcus Freeman aspect is a part of it. His basically de facto linebackers coach is a former All-American linebacker at Ohio State, James Laurinaitis, who's a GA at Notre Dame. But anyone that's been into practice knows that Al Golden's kind of being the D coordinator, and James Laurinaitis is spending a lot of time with the linebackers. So there's obviously that aspect to it. There's a lot of Ohio guys on Notre Dame's coaching staff. Obviously, Al Washington's an Ohio guy. Mike Mickens is an Ohio guy. So I think those are aspects. And I think the fact, too, that these teams, as with all the tradition that Notre Dame and Ohio State have, they've rarely ever played. I mean, in my lifetime, and I was born in 1978, they've played, I think, twice, right? Or 3 times, excuse me. Oh, no, in the regular season. I'm talking regular season. They've had a couple bowl games. They had the 05 bowl game in the Fiesta Bowl, and then obviously played it again in 2015. I'm talking like regular season. They just don't play that often. And when you think about the location and all, the fact that Notre Dame used to recruit Ohio a ton under the Lou Holtz era, and obviously, for Jerry Faust, for all his issues, he recruited a lot of Ohio kids to Notre Dame in the early 80s. So it's just one of those things is, I'm a Northwest Ohio guy and growing up a Notre Dame fan, and you're like, why don't these two teams play? I grew up in Lyman. It's like right in between the two of them, and it's like, why don't they play? It's just been the aspect of it. So I think there's also that sort of that uniqueness. This isn't a matchup that we're going to see. Like if Michigan and Notre Dame were playing in the opener, and Michigan's coming off of a playoff appearance and Big Ten championship and all that, it's like, yeah, okay, but we've seen this before, right? We've seen this story before. This has so much more intrigue, and honestly, for Notre Dame guys, it's big because before you get to passing Clemson and Georgia and Alabama, if you're trying to become the premier program, you got to first become the premier program in the Midwest. And right now, that's Ohio State. So beating them on the recruiting trail is part of it, but you got to prove you can beat them on the field. So, if you're talking about that matchup from a Notre Dame standpoint, you've got to be able to do something against the Buckeyes because they're 0-4 in my lifetime against Ohio State. So you've got to be able to prove you can beat them before you can start saying, hey, Alabama, here we come. Like, oh, okay, cool. But you got this team in Columbus you got to beat first.
Yeah, I was a student at Ohio State in 94, 95, 96, and then 97, 98, 99, and 2000. That's a joke. I was only there for 4.5 years. But I remember when that was announced, like Ohio State and Notre Dame were going to be playing it years in advance, obviously, and knowing that I was going to be a student there when that was going on, that was a huge deal to have Notre Dame come to Ohio Stadium, and it was an amazing experience. And the years flew by as you're waiting for that. Like this is going to happen. And when this was announced again, it's like this is something you look forward to. I don't know that either team is looking forward to it being the season opener. I think both programs would prefer it to be, game 2, game 3, something like that. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on this being a season opener, a career opener for Marcus Freeman. It's a tough way to open the season against Ohio State on the road and dealing with all of the expectations and let alone scheming and dealing with Ohio State's offense and all of that. Like, what are your thoughts on this being the opener for Notre Dame?
I like it, to be honest with you. I feel like if Ohio State's your number 2, then you're going to spend the whole fall camp trying to pretend like you care about we only care about the next team on our opponent. No, you don't care about New Mexico. You care about Ohio State, right? I think there's that aspect to it. And I think there's the gamesmanship. Look, I'm a former coach, and I think there's always some gamesmanship to it. Like, okay, we've got a new defensive coordinator just like you do, but like we just spent the whole bowl prep session breaking down that defensive coordinator's film where our defensive coordinator hasn't called a game since 2005, right? So, I mean, there's not a lot of film that, going to go watch Bengal film, from last year. I think there's that. And, there's a new starter quarterback. You don't want to give them a ton of film of what a Tyler Buckner-led offense is going to look like. So there's that gamesmanship to it as well. But I honestly think sometimes having a game like that in game 2 or game 3, if there's kind of cakewalk games, let's say you were to put, Toledo and who Arkansas State beforehand, you run the risk then of, are your guys really locked in for that game? For Notre Dame, they play Marshall and Cal. If you had Marshall and Cal before that, are they really locked in for Marshall and Cal? And, then all of a sudden, next thing you're Notre Dame playing Toledo, and you've got Purdue coming up and Wisconsin coming up, and you don't take Toledo as serious as you need to, and then you're needing a 4-quarter drive to go down and beat them, right? And so I kind of like the idea of it from a Notre Dame standpoint. I think it's a positive, and it's and also there's a notion, look, get that game out of the way, win or lose, right? And then now you can focus on really building your team and getting ready for that October, November stretch, which is going to be pretty challenging for Notre Dame.
Well, and for either team, win or lose, this game isn't going to devastate either of them.
Only if it's a blowout, I think.
Right.
I think that's the only way. Right.
And you have the entire season to build back on it. And we see teams, not everybody goes undefeated. And
right.
There are plenty of one-loss teams in the playoffs. So that's why I love these games, because I can't stand the scheduling where you schedule yourself to go undefeated and you don't really it's okay to have a loss. I mean, especially
right.
now with a 4-team playoff, it's okay. And then you also grow from it.
Right.
I do like the idea of just the mystery aspect
yeah.
of Notre Dame, because you get to see a little bit of what to expect from the offense, but you don't.
So are you saying you wouldn't be excited about starting your season against Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn? That doesn't excite you. That's not a challenging schedule to get you. No, look, I think it's great for the game.
Those 3, Brian.
Yeah. I don't know, some garbage team from up north that I think all of us, that's the one thing we can unify around, is that despising that program and its head coach and all of its fan base. But I think it's good for your team too. I do. I think that when you have that challenging game, because to your point, I mean, Ohio State's won one national title in the BC in the playoff era, happened in a year where they lost by 14 points in the second or third game of the year at home to a team that went 7-6, right? But you learn lessons from that game and then you go build. I mean, in 2017, Notre Dame lost to Georgia in the second game of the year. That game was, even though they lost, Notre Dame's players came out of that game like, look, we just went toe-to-toe with Georgia and we didn't play well. We should have beat them. And that kind of the confidence level that they came out of that game, it's like a week later, they went out and hung 500 plus rushing yards on Boston College. And then a week after that, they went out and beat a 10-win Michigan State team 38-18. And it wasn't that close of a game. And they just steamrolled everybody else. If they'd have beat Georgia State that weekend, I don't know if Notre Dame comes out of that game with the same confidence. You look at Ohio State last year against Oregon, you had some warts exposed in that game. Well, if they don't get exposed until maybe later in the year in a game that matters a little bit more in the committee's standpoint, if you don't have that Oregon game. So, I think games like that are great. I wish we saw more of them. And props to Ohio State for not pulling an Alabama and saying we're going to have it on a neutral field, right? I mean, this is good for college football. And it's good to see teams go on the road, play home and homes, and say, hey, we're going to challenge ourselves early. It's going to be a test for us. We're going to find out where we're strong. We're going to find out some areas maybe we're not as strong. But I promise you this, by the time we go play Penn State, the time we go play Michigan, Ohio State's warts are going to be fixed. Notre Dame, by the time we get Clemson in November, and by the time we go out to LA to play USC, we're going to have a lot of time to kind of fix these issues, because we kind of saw who we were at the beginning. Because the goal for Ohio State's, I would believe, is still to compete for and win a championship, right? And that's what Notre Dame is trying to do. And you don't evaluate yourself based on what you do against North Carolina or a depleted Stanford team or Indiana or Minnesota, teams like that. You do it by saying we're playing other similar caliber teams, and we're going to learn about ourselves from that. That's going to help us get ready to be sure to be ready to do what we need to do in October, November.